Your Honor, counsel started by describing the good character letters submitted on behalf of the defendant. We've heard the testimony today, and I have no doubt that a lot of that information is very, very true about the defendant and his growing up and him as a child and all of those things. But you also have to think about his characters and his characteristics that came out when he was in this new type of relationship. This isn't his mom, this isn't his dad, cousins, neighbors. This is that intimate dating relationship, that future romantic relationship that he may have. And what came out about Mr. Pearson that perhaps nobody had ever seen before was an individual willing to stalk, harass, scare, wanted Madison to feel his pain. That's why he sent the picture of him about to hang himself. He told Dr. Kropp that on that day, one of the reasons he was going to kill himself is because he wanted Madison to live with that guilt for the rest of her life. And I understand he's a depressed individual, and I understand he suffers from social anxiety. But those characteristics are dangerous for the future of this individual in any relationship like that he's ever in. Now, the threatening message he sent just 6 days before on its face may not appear that threatening, but to Madison it was. You heard everything that had gone on, and he knew everything that he had done up to that moment. And so if you saw that message in a vacuum, you might be like, okay, maybe this is a kid joking around, but you heard everything she went through. And so to her, at the end of May, when she saw that, that was scary. You're going to get yours. And sure enough, 6 days later, when he saw her, he took that opportunity to try to hurt her, to try to make her feel pain. Maybe before that, all it was emotional, and he never had thought about hurting her. But as soon as he saw her that day, as soon as he walked into that restaurant, noticed her, sat back down at his table, watched her get up, sat there, you saw him stare out the front of the windows. He was waiting until they were done talking to that staff member. He was waiting for them to walk away. And he sat there and he cracked his knuckles and he rubbed his hands on his shorts where his knife and his sharpening block were. And even if you believe that he didn't know Madison was there until he pulled into that parking lot. Maybe he saw her car as he drove by A1A, maybe he didn't. But when he drove in that parking lot, it's very clear. There is no reason why he moves his truck unless he sees her vehicle and he wants to park next to it for the opportunity to see her in some fashion. It makes no sense otherwise, and it makes no sense that he doesn't recall why he did that when Dr. Kropp asked him. So he knew she was there, and he stared and he waited, and certainly the intent to hurt her was going through his mind as he was sitting there and before he ran out. And so I understand with one of the downward departure grounds, unsophisticated, he has shown remorse. This level of violence is isolated. But Your Honor knows, stalking, harassing, putting in fear only leads to violence. We all know in this courtroom that's what comes next. And it did. This wasn't an individual who was otherwise normal and got into a random fight in the Chubby's parking lot with a stranger and ultimately ended up hurting them. No, that would be an isolated, random, violent act. This was someone he was emotionally attached to who had escalated his behavior towards her. So those characteristics need to be considered too. Not just who he is, not just who he was as a child, but that person that he was when he was in that attachment type relationship with his mental health. Now, we all know DOC is full of persons with mental health. That's not it's a downward departure reason that someone may need treatment. The DOC is full of individuals with mental health problems, unfortunately, far more severe than Mr. Pearson. He's not psychotic. You're right. He's not psychotic. He knew what he was doing. All the doctors state, Dr. Kropp, he's the one that would he didn't even need scans. He didn't even call for them. But what is in the scans. We heard about it ad nauseum, but at the end of the day, it has to do with potentially Mr. Pearson's future and some physical issues with him. But at the end of the day, Dr. Kropp, before he even knew what was wrong with his brain, said, this gentleman has no impairment to his executive functioning, which is the frontal lobe. He is a normal adolescent brain. He's an adolescent brain, no doubt. We're not dealing with an older gentleman. No cognitive disorders, no impairment to his executive functioning by any of his neuropsychological tests. He is suffering. He is depressed. He has social anxiety. There's a lot of people in America that have depression and social anxiety, and there's millions of young men playing football who do not stab and try to kill their girlfriends. So I understand they're presenting this to you and mitigating, and they're telling you about who he is and what he suffered through, but there's been no correlation to why that is the reason why he did what he did, as if it would be an excuse anyway. So what should you do, Your Honor? Mr. Kaczargas is right. Sentencing is not about vengeance, it's about punishment, but it is foremost about punishment. And you are to weigh this defendant's background into that. And so when you think about what should you do? Well, if Miss Roger and Kennedy Armstrong were not there, he would have kept stabbing her. She would have died. Mandatory life. Wouldn't have mattered. 18, 19, 20, it wouldn't have mattered. He failed to do that. And so, no, we're not here on a homicide case with one grieving family for the ultimate loss of one person. But we're here with 3 people, 3 separate victims, injured in the most horrific way that will deal with this, Madison especially, physically for the rest of her life, emotionally for the rest of her life. Her mother now is dealing with her own physical trauma, emotional trauma, and of her daughters. And then you have Kennedy Armstrong. You saw him up there. His demeanor. His injury is minor. His physical injury is minor in comparison to the others. But he has been through trauma. It's very clear. And he will have to deal with that as well. So you have 3 victims that will live with this for the rest of their life every day. And Madison, she lives with the fact that every new person she meets, she knows. They don't even have to say it. They don't even, ask her. She knows they're probably thinking, what happened to this girl? Every single person Madison meets for the rest of her life who sees any sort of physical disability with her will wonder. And she will know that as she talks to that person. So every single moment of every single part of her life, she will think about June 3rd. And so you have to think about the fact that there are 3 victims in this case. What would you do if this was just an attack against Madison? What would you do if Madison, her mom, were there, but the defendant only attacked Miss Roger and you had the injuries that you had in a similar circumstance? What would that be? What would that punishment be? And then what would it have been had he never got to Madison and her mother and Kennedy stopped at first but got the injuries he did? This is a single incident, but it's 3 victims, and technically under the law you can run all 3 counts consecutive. But you should think about the punishment that you would apply in each individual scenario. And I submit to you that it's not a life sentence. It should be a lot of years in prison. They will suffer for a lot of years. I spoke to the one downward departure element judge. The youthful age, the other one, he does not appear to appreciate the consequences of his actions due to his youthful age. We know he's youthful. However, even Dr. Rubino said he could. And Dr. Kropp said he could. He could conform. He knew. We knew he did because he outlined his plan that morning to Dr. Kropp. He had a complex thought process of where he was going to go. If you believe that to be true, what he told his doctor, Dr. Kropp, that he intended to kill himself that day and nothing else. That whole process was complex thoughts. I'm going to go to the beach. So my parents can't find me at home. I'm going to kill myself there. I'm going to bring a knife that has my name on it so they can identify me. And I'm doing all of this to hurt Madison for the rest of her life. He knew the actions on the morning. He had actually contemplated what they would be. So he's someone who can appreciate the consequences of his actions. And like Mr. Katurga said, even if you find that some of the mitigation has been proven, there's still that second prong. Should you depart? And absolutely 100% the state believes that this is not a case where a departure is appropriate. Not at all. All three victims will think and live about this trauma for the rest of their life, and he deserves to be punished for a very, very, very long time. For the pain he has put them through already, for the pain they will all remain in, all of their families. This is a ripple effect, Your Honor. And for all of the reasons stated and all of the evidence presented today, we ask you to impose a just punishment of life in prison. Thank you.
Thank you, State. All right, let me take a brief recess. I want to just think about a few things before I impose sentence. So we'll stand in recess for about 15 minutes.